Hello everyone. Today inshallah we are going to continue from where we stopped the last time. Of course, in the previous lectures we started our discussion or on the title or discussing the title process costing. Of course, we divided our discussion into three different cases. The first case without any or a manufacturing process that has no beginning work in process or ending work in process, and we said that it is a simple averaging process, dividing the total cost by the total number of units. The second case was a little bit more sophisticated or more difficult. The case or the second case or the second scenario was of a manufacturing process that has no beginning inventory but has an ending inventory, and we said that if we have any ending inventory, we need to use the 5-step procedure. And then we stopped at case number 3 or scenario number 3, which is concerned with a manufacturing process that has both beginning work in process inventory and ending work in process inventory. And of course, we said according to case number 3, or the third scenario, if it has an ending work in process, we would use the same 5-step procedure. But because we have a beginning work in process, we need first of all to determine the inventory valuation method, whether to use the first method, which is the weighted average, or the second method, which is the first in, first out, or the FIFO method. Of course, the weighted average method, it assumes that the completion of the beginning work in process is simultaneous to the starting of new products. While as the first in, first out method, it assumes that we first finish the beginning work in process and then we start new products within the manufacturing process within a specific period. Now let us see what is the difference between the two, or how we are going to calculate the cost of the ending work in process and the completed and transferred out units according to both cases or both methods, the weighted average and the first in, first out. Of course, this is the data, this is the information for March for the assembly department. Of course, we have 225 units with direct materials of 18,000 and conversion cost of 8,100 with a percentage of completion of 100% for the direct materials and 60% from the conversion cost. Of course, we said that this or these amounts or this information or this data was taken from what we did or from the books, or let us say from our computations in the previous month, because this information is the ending inventory or the ending work in process inventory in 29 February or at the end of February. Therefore, this information was taken from a previous year. During March, we started new production or the production of new units by the amount of 275. Of these units, or total units of 500, we have finished or we have completed and transferred out from the assembly department to the testing department the number of 400 units. While as, of course, if we have 500, we finished 400, therefore we would have 100 remaining as the data presents here. We have 100 work in process inventory. Of course, the 100 work in process inventory or the 100 units as ending work in process inventory had 100% of direct materials, or have taken 100% of direct materials and only 50% of the conversion costs. Of course, the costs that were incurred in March in this production process or in this manufacturing process was 19,800 and 16,380 with a total of 36,180. Of course, the amount of $19,800 was related to the direct materials for, do you say the 225 or the 275? Why did we incur the $19,800? For the 225, we have already placed the total direct materials they need in the previous month. correct? Therefore, in this month, we will not add any direct materials for the 225. Therefore, all the costs of direct materials that were incurred in this period is related to the 275 units, correct? While as for the conversion cost, we incurred $16,380. This amount is related to what? First of all, to complete the 225, to complete the 40% that is still remaining, because the 60% were incurred in the previous month. Therefore, in this month, we are going to complete from where we stopped. Therefore, we are going only to incur 40% in order to convert these unfinished goods into finished goods or completed goods. While as the remaining would be incurred for the 100 units to reach to 50%, of course, as well as completing the 175, as we are going to see the 175 units that are completed and transferred out from the units that were started within this month. Any questions? Of course, this is the data. Now we are going to, first of all, see how we are going to use the 5-step procedure according to the weighted average inventory costing method. Of course, the weighted average costing method or process costing method, it considers all the data, or let us say all the work done up to date. It considers all the work done up to date, whether this work was started in the previous month or if it is started within this month. It does not separate between the two. That's why we are calling it a weighted average. We are averaging what we are doing, or we are averaging the units that were started from the previous month or the previous years or the previous periods with the units that are started within this month. Consider it like this. We said that a process costing system is an averaging method, correct? We will divide the cost by the number of units, correct? Of course, the number of units are equivalent units because we have an ending work in process. In a weighted average costing method, we are going to divide the total costs that were incurred in the previous month and this month. We are not going to separate the two costs. We are going to average these two costs. We are going to take these two costs as if they were incurred in the same period. Therefore, the total costs here are the costs that are incurred within the period or within the current period, and or as well as the costs that were incurred in the previous period. No separation here between the two costs. And we are going to divide it by the number of units. The number of units that were started, or the total number of units, let us say. Whether these units were started in the previous year or the previous period or the previous month, as well as the units that are started within this month. Therefore, we are not going also to separate between the units that were started before or started in the previous periods and the units that were started within this period. That's why we are going to call it a weighted average costing method. Any questions? Therefore, as we can see here, it calculates the cost per equivalent unit. Of course, this is the calculation of the cost per equivalent unit, correct? How do we calculate the cost per equivalent unit? We divide the cost by the number of equivalent units. Therefore, the cost per equivalent units here he designates of all work done to date. That means we are going to calculate the cost for all the work done, whether it was started in the previous year or in the previous periods or in this period, regardless of the accounting period in which it was done. Assigns the cost, and of course after calculating the cost per unit or per equivalent unit, we need to assign. Therefore, we are going to assign using this cost per equivalent unit. We are going to assign cost to the ending work in process for the current period and the completed and transferred out or the finished goods that were completed within the specific period. Therefore, assigns this cost to equivalent units completed and transferred out, as well as to incomplete units still in process, which is the ending work in process. Of course, the weighted average cost is the total of all costs in the work in process account divided by the total equivalent units of work done to date. Of course, this is what we just said. The beginning balance of the work in process account is blended in with the current period cost. This is the first thing that we said. We said that we are not going to separate between the costs that were incurred in the previous year and the costs that were incurred in this current year. Therefore, we are going to blend, we are going to mix these two costs or these two categories with each other. Of course, the FIFO, as we are going to see, it does not have this simplicity in calculating the cost per equivalent unit, as we are going to see. Now let us start with the steps. Of course, step number one, we need to summarize the physical units, correct? Then we need to calculate the equivalent units for these physical units, and then we need to summarize the total cost to account for, and then we need to calculate the cost per equivalent unit, and then we are going to assign the cost to the ending work in process and to the completed and transferred out units. Therefore, as we can see here, the steps are the same. We are going to use the same steps, but now we need to designate first what is the inventory valuation method that we are going to use. First of all, we are considering the weighted average, so let us see how we are going to apply the different steps. As we can see here, step number one, the physical units, as we said that step number one needs to answer two questions or two different questions. From where did these physical units come from and where did they go? Of course, 225 were as beginning work in process, and 275 were started within this current period. Therefore, the total to account for is 500 physical units. Of course, where did the 500 units go? 400 was completed and transferred out, and 100 is still in process or as a ending work in process inventory. As we can see here, we did not divide the ending work in process into two categories. We said that the 400 was completed and transferred out. We did not designate the origin of these units. We did not say that from the 400 to 125 were started from the previous year and the 175 were started within this year. We did not say that. We did not separate between the work that was done in the previous year and the work that is done in the current year or the current period. Therefore, as we can see here, we are averaging or we are using the weighted average method. Of course, 400 plus 100 is 500, which is the total units that is accounted for. Of course, as we said in case number 2, these two numbers should always equal. These two numbers should always equal each other. Now let us go to step number 2. Step number 2, as we said, we need to calculate the equivalent units for the physical units. Of course, the 400 are completed 100%. Therefore, what is the equivalent units for the 400 units? Are 400 units, always. The completed units, the 100% completed units, have the same number of units as equivalent units. Because what is the definition of equivalent units? We said that equivalent units are the number of units that would have been completed if we incurred the same costs that were incurred in manufacturing these units. Of course, we have manufactured 400 completed units, therefore the equivalent units would be 400 for the direct materials, because it took 100% of direct materials and 100% of conversion cost, therefore it would be also 400 units. Now let us go to the 100 units according to our data, according to our question or according to our illustration. They said that these units, because they were started, they took 100% of the direct materials, because the direct materials were added at the beginning of the manufacturing process. Therefore, any started units would take 100% of the direct materials. Therefore, as we can see here, and this is the data that were also given within the example or the illustration. Therefore, from the 100 units, the equivalent units according to the direct materials category, it is also 100 units. Why? Because 100 units multiplied by 100%. Therefore, 100 units. It has taken all the direct materials that it needs to be finished. While as it stopped at the percentage of completion of 50%. And we said that the conversion costs are added up evenly onto the production process, correct? Therefore, the 100 units multiplied by 50%, which is the percentage of completion of conversion cost, would equal, of course, 50 units. What do you mean by 50 units? That means that we would have produced 50 complete units if we have incurred the same cost that we incurred for the 100 units in order to reach them, or in order to reach these units up to the 50% that they have reached. Any questions? Therefore, as we can see here, the steps are the same. We did not have, or we did not change anything from case number 2. Now, of course, in step number 3, we need to summarize all the costs to account for. Here, in step number 2, or let us say in case number 2, we only took the costs that were incurred within a specific period. Why? Because we did not have any beginning inventory. But in this case, we have beginning inventory, therefore we need to consider the costs that were incurred as beginning inventory, or the costs that were incurred in the previous year, or the previous period, or the previous month in this case. Therefore, the work in process beginning is the $26,100 total, which is $18,000 and $8,100. This is the information that was taken from case number 2, or that was taken from the previous year or the previous month. Of course, the costs that were added within the current period, which is March, is the $36,180, $19,800 as direct materials, and $16,380 as conversion costs. Of course, these costs were designated and given to us by the illustration or by the example. Of course, we have an accounting information system that accumulates this data. Therefore, we have ledgers and we have accounts that we can take the data that we need from. Of course, after step number 3, which is the total cost to account for, of course, the addition or the adding of these two gives us the total cost to account for. These are the costs that we are going to separate or divide among two categories: the ending work in process and the completed and transferred out units. As we can see here, we are going to use all the costs, whether incurred in the previous year or incurred in this year, as we can see here, as we just said in our discussion of the weighted average method. Of course, step number 4 is the calculation of the equivalent units, or the cost per equivalent unit. Of course, the cost per equivalent unit could be calculated by dividing the cost, or the total cost to account for, by the total number of equivalent units, whether these units were started in this period or within the previous period. This is the weighted average method. Therefore, the 37,800, this was taken from step number 3, and 24,480, as we can see, was taken also from step number 3, divided by the total number of equivalent units, 500 and 450. Of course, the 500 and 450 were taken from step number 2. Therefore, as we can see here, in step number 4, we are using the previous steps. We are using the data that have been calculated, or that has been calculated from previous steps. As we can see here, the cost per equivalent unit is $75.6 and $54.4. Of course, the $75.6 is for the direct materials, and $54.4 is for the conversion cost. Of course, the cost per equivalent units here is for all the costs were incurred within this period or within previous periods. We did not separate here between the costs that were incurred in the previous periods and the costs that were incurred in this period. Of course, the last step, which is step number 5, which is the, let us say, the main goal of any process costing system, is to calculate the costs, or to assign the costs for the ending work in process and for the completed and transferred out units. Therefore, the completed and transferred out units are 400 units. Of course, 400 equivalent units for the direct materials and 400 equivalent units for the conversion costs. These were taken from step number 2, multiplied by the cost per equivalent unit, which was taken from step number 4. Therefore, we now know that the production cost for the 400 units is $52,000. This is the cost for completing and transferring out and producing in full the 400 units that were completed and transferred out. Now, for the work in process ending inventory, from step number 2, we knew or we calculated that the equivalent units for the direct materials is 100, and we have also calculated that the equivalent units for the conversion cost is 50 units. And we also have calculated the cost per equivalent unit. Therefore, we could multiply the equivalent units for each category of cost by the cost per equivalent unit, and we would get the total cost or the total production cost that were incurred in order to produce the 100 units, 100% of direct materials, and only 50% of conversion cost. This is the cost of the 100 units that were incurred in order to reach the 50% percentage of completion. Any questions? Therefore, as we can see here, the 62,280, which is the total cost that are accounted for, because the 52,000, which is for the completed and transferred out, and the 10,280, or the 62,280, were divided among these two categories. Therefore, as we can see here, the 62,280 would always equal the 62,280, which is the total costs to account for. Any questions? Therefore, as we can see here, we have reached to the end, or to the, let us say, the main objective of any process costing system, of course, by using the weighted average costing system. Any questions? Now let us consider the first in, first out. Of course, the first in, first out method would not consider the same assumption as the weighted average method. In the first in, first out method, it assumes that we are going to finish first the beginning work in process, and then we are going to start new products within the period. Therefore, the first part that is finished within any manufacturing process is the beginning work in process, and then it would be completed by the units that are started within this period, or within this month, or within this year. As we can see from our case, let us take our case, or the data that was given by the case. As we can see here, we have 225 as beginning work in process. According to the first in, first out, we are going to assume that from the 400 units, 225 are from the beginning work in process. This is the assumption. We start by finishing what we have started in previous years or previous periods. And then the completion, which is the 175, we are going to assume that the 175 were started within the current period, correct? This is the assumption that is considered by the first in, first out. Now, if we assume that from the 400 units, the 225 were first completed, therefore these costs, or the cost of the beginning work in process, would not be blended with the costs that were incurred within this period. Why? Because we have designated, we have assumed that the 225 are finished and completed and transferred out units. Therefore, these costs would be assigned directly to the 400 units. Correct? Therefore, the assumption according to the first out, the first thing we are going to do, we are going to finish the work that has been started within previous years or previous months or previous periods. Of course, if this assumption it was taken or this assumption was assumed, therefore the total cost of the total cost that has been incurred within previous periods would be assigned directly to the work that has been finished or to the completed and transferred out work. Therefore, in the FIFO method, we are not going to blend. We are not going to average these two costs. We are going to say that these costs are for the completed and transferred out, while as these costs, the 19,800 and the 16,380, what do you think these costs are for? First of all, to complete, therefore these costs that are incurred, let us say the costs that incurred within the period. First of all, we are going to use these costs in order to complete the beginning working process. Correct? And then we are going to use these costs for two things. To complete the 100, to start and complete the 175. Therefore, start and complete the completed and transferred out. And the remaining would be for starting the end work in process. Therefore, as we can see here, the costs that are incurred, first of all, would finish the incomplete units, and then it would start the 275. From the 275, of course, as we can see here, 175 would be completed in order to complete the 400 units that are transferred out, correct? And the remaining, of course, from the 275 is the 100. Therefore, from where did we get this 100? It is the 275 that was started within this period, minus the 175 that were completed. Therefore, 100 is still incomplete. This is the assumption by the first in, first out. Therefore, in the first in, first out, we are not going to, this is the main point of any FIFO method, we are not going to blend the costs. We are not going to blend the costs that were incurred in the previous months with the costs that are incurred within the current month. As well as we are not going to blend the units that were started in previous months or previous periods with the units that are started within this period. Let us now see how we are going to use or apply the 5-step procedure if we are using the first in, first out method. Of course, according to the first in, first out method, process costing method assigns the cost of the previous accounting period's equivalent units in the beginning work in process inventory to the first units completed and transferred out of the process. This is what we said, that the first thing that we are going to consider, that the beginning work in process is completed into completed and transferred out units. And then we are going to assign the cost of equivalent units worked on during the current period, first to complete beginning inventory, and then next to start and complete new units, and then at the end to the units in the ending work in process. As we can see here, this is the designation that we have just discussed. That the costs that are incurred within the period, first of all, we are going to use in order to complete our beginning work in process, and then to start and complete some amount of units, and then the end or the remaining of the costs would start another units within the current period, but of course it would not be finished, therefore it would stay in the ending work in process. This is the main idea of any first in, first out method. Of course, as we can see here, the beginning balance of work in process account is kept separate from the current period cost. Therefore, we are having a separation, not like the weighted average cost that blends all the costs all together. Therefore, let us now apply the steps. Let us now consider step number 1 and 2. Of course, step number 1 and 2, we said that we are going to first of all summarize the physical units and then calculate the equivalent units for the physical units. Of course, first difference between the weighted average and the first in, first out method in step number 1. The physical units here should be separated according to the units that were started within this period and the units that were started within previous years or previous periods. As we said, in the FIFO method, we are going to separate. We are not going to blend like the weighted average method. As we can see here, first of all, we need to answer the question from where did we, or from where these physical units come from. First of all, 225 as beginning and 275 as started within this period, which is March. The total to account for is 500 units. Now we need to answer the following question: where did these physical units go? Therefore, first of all, 400 of these units were completed and transferred out. Correct? From the 400 units that were completed and transferred out, according to our assumption, according to the FIFO method, 225 from the beginning work in process. Therefore, first of all, we need to designate the completed and transferred out, which are the 400, correct? From the 400, we assume that the 225 from the beginning inventory is first completed. Therefore, in order to calculate, or in order to complete the 400, we need to start and finish another 175, correct? Therefore, 175 are started and completed within this period. Therefore, the 175 plus the 225 would equal the 400 that are completed and transferred out. As we can see here, we did not blend. We have separated the units that were started from the previous year and the units that are started within this year. Of course, the 100 ending work in process is always designated as work that has started within the year but have not, or within the period but have not been finished yet. Therefore, the 100, as we can see here, is the work in process ending inventory, which is the second thing to designate. Therefore, as we can see here, the 500 units were divided up according to two categories as case number 2, as case number 3 according to the weighted average. We do not have anything new. We said that the completed and transferred out is 400 and the work in process ending is 100, the same as the previous method. But here in the FIFO, we are not going to use the 400 as one number. We are not going to use the 400 as one pool. We are going to separate between the units that were started in the previous year or the previous period and the units that are started within this period. As we can see here, the 225 and the 175. Any questions? Therefore, this is the only difference in step number 1. Let us now go to the step number 2. Of course, step number 2 is calculating the equivalent units, correct? And we said according to the first in, first out, we are going to divide the costs that were incurred within this period for what? For completing the beginning work in process, to start and complete a designated amount of units, and to start some sort of ending work in process, correct? Therefore, all the costs will be divided, or the costs that are incurred within this period will be divided upon the equivalent units that for the work done within this period only. because the costs that were incurred in the previous year or the previous period will not be divided onto these three categories. It will be assigned directly, as I just said, it will be assigned directly onto the finished and the completed and transferred out units. Therefore, in calculating our equivalent units, we are going to calculate our equivalent units according to the work done within the period. We are going to calculate the equivalent units according to the work done within this period or within the current period. Why? Because as we said, the costs that were incurred in the previous period will be assigned directly to the work that has been finished or to the completed and transferred out work. Therefore, let us now calculate the equivalent units to the 225. Of course, according to our example, the 225 has taken 100% of direct materials in the previous year or the previous period and took 60% in the previous period. Therefore, how much it would take from the direct materials and conversion costs in this period? 0. First of all, it would take 0% of direct materials because it took 100% in the previous year, and it would take the completion of the 60%, which is the 40% within this current year. Therefore, we are going to multiply the 225 by 0%, which is 100% minus 100%, and for the direct materials, and then for the conversion cost, because the conversion cost we have only incurred 40% of these conversion costs in this period. Therefore, we would multiply the 225 units by the 40%, which is the 100% minus 60%. Any questions? Therefore, as we can see here, we are calculating the equivalent units for the work done within this current period. Why? Because the costs that are incurred in the previous year would not be assigned onto these categories. It would be assigned only directly onto one category, which is the completed and transferred out. Therefore, as we can see here, we have the 175 now that is started and completed. The 175, these are the number of units that were started within this period and completed within this period. Therefore, as we can see here, the 175 has taken 100% in this period of direct materials and took 100% of conversion costs in this period. Therefore, we would multiply the 175 by 100% for the direct materials and by 100% also for the conversion costs. Therefore, as we can see here, the equivalent units are equal to the physical units for the started and completed within this month. Any questions? Now let us go to the ending work in process. What would be the work done on the ending work in process? Of course, as we said, that the ending work in process, according to the FIFO, we are using the assumption, or we are calculating according to the assumption that the ending work in process was started in this period but was not finished. Therefore, all the costs that are incurred for this category of units were incurred in this specific period. Therefore, if we have if the 100 units has taken 100% of direct materials, it has taken the 100% of direct materials in this current period. Therefore, 100 units multiplied by 100% is 100 units, 100 equivalent units. And according to our example, they said that this ending work in process has completed only, or has reached only to the 50% percentage of completion. Therefore, according to the conversion cost, we are going to multiply the 50%, which is the costs or the percentage of completion or the work done within this period. Because the 50% within this period is the same as the 50% because it is in the half. We are now talking about the 50% that is incurred within this period. We are not subtracting 100% from the 50%. We are using the 50% as it is. Therefore, the 50% here which is the percentage of completion of the 100 units. 100 units multiplied by 50%, which is 50%. So as we can see here, for the started and completed, it is the same criteria or the same calculation as before. For the 100, it is the same as before. As we can see here, 150, the 100 for the direct materials and the 50 for the conversion cost is the same equivalent units that were calculated for the weighted average method, correct? But the difference here that we have separated in the completed and transferred out. The 400 is not 400 or one amount or one pool, let us say, but it is more than two pools. First from the beginning inventory, and the second from the units that have been started and completed within this period. Any questions? Now let us go to step number 3, 4, and 5. Of course, the steps are the same. As we can see here, in step number 3, we need to calculate the total costs to account for. Of course, the total cost to account for is the total cost, whether these costs have been incurred in the previous year or the previous period, or has been incurred within this year or this current period. Therefore, as we can see here, the work in process beginning, as you can see here, and the cost added within the current period, as you can see here. Therefore, the total cost to account for, as we can see, is the same step as the weighted average. Now, in step number 4, we said that we are going to divide the costs that are incurred within this period by the equivalent units for the work done within this period. Therefore, we are not going to use the same application in the weighted average. As you can remember, in the weighted average, we use these amounts, correct? But in this case, according to the first in, first out method, we are only going to use the costs that are added within this period. Therefore, as we can see here, we are going to divide the 19,800 and the 16,380, which are the costs that are incurred within this period. That's why we have calculated the equivalent units for the work done within this specific period. Because as we said, the cost that has been incurred, as we are going to see in step number 4, step number 5, the cost that has been incurred in the previous year would be assigned directly to the work that has been completed and transferred out within this period. Therefore, as we can see here, 19,800 divided by 275, of course, from where this 275? The 275 is the total number of equivalent units from step number 2. Therefore, these amounts, these total number of equivalent units are from step number 2, and the costs are from step number 3. But you need here to be careful that these costs are not the total cost, but are the cost that has been incurred within this current period. Of course, as we can see here, the cost of direct materials is 72, and the cost for the conversion cost is only 52. Now let us go to the main point, or to the main idea, or let us say to the main objective of any process costing system, is the calculation of the two things or the two categories, the cost of the work that has been completed and transferred out, and for the ending work in process. First of all, we are going to start with the completed and transferred out. This is the first category. Of course, according to the first in, first out, this category of 400 units, first of all, we are going to assign on it the costs were incurred in the previous year or the previous period, as we just said. Therefore, as we can see here, these are the costs that are incurred within the previous period. The 8,100 and the 18,000, with the total of 26,100, is the total cost that are incurred within February, or that has been incurred within February. Now we are going to assign the costs that are incurred within this period in order to complete the beginning work in process and to transfer this beginning work in process or incomplete goods onto completed and transferred out. Therefore, that the costs that are added to the beginning work in process in the current period is the 72 multiplied by the equivalent units for the beginning work in process that has been incurred within this period. As we can see here, we are going to use the amounts that has been calculated in step number 2, the 0 and the 19 units. Therefore, for the direct materials, the equivalent units for the direct materials for this period or for this specific period is 0 units. Why? Because all the direct materials has been incurred or has been added in the previous year and has been included in this amount. Therefore, as we can see here, the 72 multiplied by 0, it would be 0. And now the 90 equivalent units that has been calculated in step number 2 multiplied by the $52 per equivalent unit that has been calculated in step number 4 would equal 4,680. Now, $26,100 were incurred in the previous period. 4,680 were incurred in this current period. The addition of these two would give us 30,780. This is the cost of producing the 225 units, whether in this period or the previous period. Any questions? Therefore, as we can see here, the 30,780 is only designated or is the cost for the 225. Now we have the 175 units in order to complete the 400 units. Therefore, as we can see here, started and completed, which is the 175. Of course, 175 multiplied by 72 and 175 multiplied by 52, it would equal 21,700. This is the costs that has been incurred to start and complete 175 units within this period. Of course, 21,700 plus 30,780 would equal 52,480. This is the cost of completing and transferring out 400 units. These are the costs that will be transferred from the assembly department to the testing department. At the end now, this is the second category, as we can see here, which is the work in process ending, which is of course 100 units. As we can see here, the 100 units multiplied by 72, which is the cost per equivalent unit, and plus the 50 units multiplied by $52, which is the cost per equivalent unit, would equal 9,800. This amount, which is the 9,800, would stay in the work in process and would not be transferred from the work in process of the assembly department to the work in process or onto the testing department. Of course, the journal entries would be the same as the journal entries that we took according to case number 2. The only change would be according to the completed and transferred out units. The last, let us say, entry, because as we can see here, the weighted average, it gave us an amount of 52,000, while as the FIFO gave us an amount of 52,480. Therefore, the only difference according to the journal entries would be in the last entry that transfers the amount that has been completed and transferred out from the work in process of the assembly department to the testing department. This would be the only difference in the journal entries. By this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. As we can see here, we have finished all the cases. We have discussed the case with no beginning or ending work in process inventory. We have discussed the case if we have only ending work in process inventory. And also we have discussed the case if we have both beginning and ending work in process inventory. Inshallah, the next time we are going to start maybe start solving some of the problems, and we are going to go through some of small topics like using the standard costing systems within the process costing system, and we are going also to discuss briefly a hybrid costing system that is a mix between a job costing system that we took in Cost Accounting 1 and the process costing system that we took in Cost Accounting 2. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you inshallah the next time.